Real-world computer programming for kids of all ages. Step 39. Populating the states table with data. Part 1. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody. For me, it's early morning, September 3rd, 2020. But I, of course, don't know when you will be reading this. It won't even be posted until the latter part of this month, so sometime after that, obviously. Anyway, so we have gathered the data we need for our states table, but it at present resides in text files. Here's my plan of action. Insert the state name and area square mile values into the table, giving the columns that require values, which have been designated not null, placeholder values, such as 0. Update the states table, adding the actual value in the population 2020 column from the text file that has that. Update the states table again, this time adding the actual value in the date admitted column from the corresponding text file. Update the states table yet again, this time adding the book URL value from the appropriate text file. Before that, though, I have reconsidered the structure of the table and decided to make the book image column a string path to the location of the file after all, as is de rigueur. I don't know if that's pronounced right. I don't speak French. And the preferred method. That will be a lot easier, as well as being what you would probably do in a real-life situation, so it's a better approach. Okay, then, the first thing to do will be to restructure the states table in that way. Let's get to it. Restructure table. This is why I love Database Workbench, DBWB. It's easy as eating pie to alter the table. Normally, you have to jump through hoops to do so, but I asked myself, knowing how easy DBWB normally is to work with, could it be possible that all I need to do is modify the column in DBWB's Columns tab? And sure enough, it worked like a champ. I changed the name of the column from book image to book image path and changed its data type from blob to varchar50. Note that at this point it still has its original name and data type in the column list on the left of DBWB. This is because the change hasn't really been made yet, although the DDL has been updated already, as you can see here, and it shows a screenshot of that. To make the change stick or take, click the Create/Alter Table button or icon, and it shows that in a screenshot, so you can find it easily in DBWB. Respond yes to the Alter Table States confirmation dialog. Note that now the altered column has moved to the bottom of the list of columns on the left, and it shows that in the screenshot. That doesn't matter, though. Its location in the list of columns doesn't really change anything of import. By the way, note too that the not null columns are visually indicated by having the little icon to the left of their names filled with color, pink. And the primary key column is not only filled, because it is also designated not null, but it also has a key icon magnetized to the top of that icon. So, we're in business. We will store a full path in that modified column, path plus file name, and read that value from it when we want to display the image on our form. Yes, we will create another Windows Forms app to display the data after we create the one-time use utility program to add the data into the database. If we had the full version of DBWB, the paid version that is, we could take advantage of its tools such as import data, but this will be good practice for us to create a utility to copy the data from our text files into the database. So it's probably better this way anyway. Create the utility to import data. In Visual Studio, create a new C# project, naming it MySQL Data Import. It should look something like this, but your location value will differ. And it shows a screenshot of what's seen at this point in Visual Studio. Insert square mile value. To prepare to insert the square mileage value into the area square mile column and also the corresponding rank value into the area rank column, we need to make sure what our text file contains is ready for reading. That is to say, we want to make sure that it is well formatted. Again, that data appears in the file like so, after I remove the commas from the square mile values. And it shows the first 10 and then the last record in that text file from rank 1 Alaska to rank 50 Rhode Island. To make the data easier to deal with programmatically, we want to convert this to a CSV file. The quick and dirty way of doing this is to replace a number of spaces in the file which exists between the rank value and the state name and also between the state name and the square mile value with a comma. By doing that, the data now looks like this, and it shows it with rank, comma, name of state, comma, square mile, and then next line, and so on. Wallaby, just what the intern ordered. You can now do a save as with a CSV extension rather than the default TXT. In fact, you may as well do that now. So now we can add the code to read that file, loop through it, and populate those values into the states table. Add a button to your form, name it button insert square mile, etc., and give it the text insert square miles, etc., or something like that. This is a one-time use utility, so it doesn't have to look fancy. Just plop the button anywhere on the form. Double-click the button to open its click event handler in the code window. Add the following code there. This is all the code from the utility so far. This time I will bold not the new parts, it's all new, but the key parts, which I will dissect, not literally of course, later. And then it has quite a few lines, quite a few dozen lines of code. Not too awfully much though. See if you can figure out what's going on in that code before we take it apart, so to speak. I will discuss it bold bit by bold bit, but first want to prove that it worked. Here's the data tab of the states table in DBWB after running that code. And then a screenshot shows that. The database table actually has 50 records in it now, one for each state. Note that the columns, which can be null, are null right now. We will populate them in future sections in the next step. From this point on, as we update the states table with the missing values, I will only show what's really new, update statements, for example. But now, to go over the bolded code above to explain what it's doing, especially the database-centric stuff. First off, though, take note that here we are embedding SQL, the insert statement, within C# code. They are different languages, C# and SQL, but merged together in this way. They don't fight like your stereotypical cats and dogs, but get along just fine, as this pair does. And it shows a photograph of a cat and a dog. So then, on to the bolded parts. And it shows a using clause, mysql.data.mysql client. The using clause is needed in order to work with MySQL. And then a connection, MySQL connection is declared and a connection string. With any database you use, you will need a connection string, which contains the location of the database and your credentials for accessing it. Where is it? It's local at 127.0.0.1. Who is attempting to use it? Root is the username shown there, with a password of Great Oogly Moogly, or more or less. Which database is being accessed? States, DB. And then there shows the connection object being instantiated, and connection string is passed to it, and then the connection is open. You also need a connection object, in this case a MySQL connection object. Pass it the connection string, and then open the connection. You can think of opening a database connection as being somewhat the same as opening the floodgates, or, if you will, turning the spigot, not spigot, on the water hose to allow water to come out. Keep that thought in mind. And then it shows several lines of code, about half a dozen or so. SQL statements such as insert, update, and delete are considered in database terminology to be commands. So there is a command object to, in this case, a MySQL command object. Using the connection object instance, CONN, create command is called and assigned to the command object. So what will the command object do? That depends on what you assign its command text property. Here we are giving it an insert command. Insert into the table name, then a list of columns, and the word values, then a list of values. In this case, database parameters are being used. Did you notice the @ sign preceding the values? We have used it before for string literals, such as in the connection string, CONN, but in this context, it signifies that the values being passed are not literal values to be inserted into the database, but they are parameters. In other words, they are assigned elsewhere. And indeed, here are the assignments. And it shows the command object and its parameters property with the added method, add with value. And it has the name of the parameter, and then after a comma, the value you're going to assign to that parameter, which then gets inserted into the database. The population 2020 parameter is assigned a value of 0. Why? Why not just leave it blank or ignore it altogether? Because it's one of the columns that has been designated not null. It must receive a value. Not much of a value, 0, but still a value, so the database doesn't squawk when we give it this placeholder or appeasement value. Similar is true for the date admitted column, which is assigned an obviously bogus, but genuine and valid date value, the lowest, earliest one it can handle over a millennium in the past, January 1st, 1000. And then we have the execute non-query method attached to the command object. That's called. To execute the command is not to kill it, it is to run it. The non-query part stipulates that this is not a query, a select statement, but rather a statement or command that alters the database by adding, subtracting, or modifying at least one of its rows or records. And then it shows the finally block with just one bit of code in it, connection object con.close. Remember the analogy of turning on the water spigot when we call the connections open method? Once we're through with the connection, we need to close it. This only has to happen once after we're through with writing to the database, just as it is only opened once per method. So I put the call to close in the finally block to assure that in the end, the connection definitely does get closed. Und damit basta, as the Germans say. In the next step, we will add the population value, admission date, and the image path and URL of the corresponding book. There is a book about each date, which we will be featuring. Until then.